Leviticus and Numbers here in a little bit, but not so much as what they have to say, but how they compare to the other ones. It's been a while, so there are two things that we talked about the last time we met. The number one of them was the first one was, where did the Israelites cross the Red Sea, or did they cross the Red Sea? And do you remember the thing that we talked about, what made that a little bit confusing? The Yam Surf. Do you remember Yam Surf?
Okay.
That's the word. It does not translate as red. It translates as reed.
Right. Yep.
And so the question is, should we even translate it as Red Sea or Reed Sea? Some translations do say Reed Sea. Some translations, I think most translations actually say the Red Sea. And I don't even know if there's a consensus of whether or not scholars believe that the word for Reed Sea is also Red Sea, or it's the same thing. It's probably one of those things that people argue back and forth over. So we talked about some possible locations like the Red Sea, or maybe some of the Red Sea inlets, or some of those water inlets that might have existed at one point back before the 1940s, 1950s, when the Egyptian government flooded the region for the Suez Canal. So that makes it also almost impossible to do any archaeological work, because if it was in one of those locations and we were looking for signs of a mass army buried in a body of water, that's probably now destroyed or even buried.
In the right place.
Yeah. So you have to know where you're looking, and then you have to be able to dig through the canal, and assuming the canal didn't destroy any of it. But there's always a possibility that they found something while they were digging the canal. That happens all the time in Europe. I think I remember a video that they were building a McDonald's, and they found some ancient ruins through the McDonald's, so they put glass flooring in the McDonald's so you can see the ancient ruins.
Wow.
And there's...
Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to.
Yeah. Preservation is a big thing when it comes to archaeological heritage, especially in the West, especially now in the West. I don't think that was always the case. But like now, if you want to, like the people who are out West in America that are building pipelines, one of the problems that they often find that they run into is going through some heritage sites, and they have to see if there's cultural significance before they can move forward in building in that direction, or having to go around. But anyway, so we talked about possible locations, and I told you, I don't even remember which one I told you I thought was possibly it, but I mean, it's best guesswork if that's the case anyway. And the second thing we started talking about, I don't think we got very, very far in this, was Mount Sinai. So Mount Sinai is important as a historical location for the Israelites because of what? Because of the Ten Commandments, or specifically where God met Moses, right? Yes. So we first see a reference to, this is where God meets Moses on the burning bush first, and then later with the Ten Commandments, where we first see its reference in Exodus chapter 3, verse 12. He said, I will certainly be with you, and this shall be a sign to you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. So that means that this is where God met them, and this is where they were expected to come back to. So, do I have my remote on? The question is often, where is this mountain? In fact, I'm willing to bet if you look in the back of your Bibles and you have a map of this biblical area, it probably has multiple locations for the Mount Sinai location. The best thing we can do is that we can guess it is in what is called the Sinai Peninsula. The Sinai Peninsula is in Egypt, and it is the only part of Egypt that is, I think it's in Asia. The rest of Egypt is all in Africa. and it is approximately 2,300 square miles. Sorry, 23,000 square miles. Thank you for correcting me on that. Now, that's kind of a big area. In fact, I didn't even know what that would be the equivalent to that would help someone put a frame of reference in that. But you could see that, especially looking at Israel itself, it is probably at least twice the landmass of the whole country of Israel. So it's probably at least 2 Israels, but just by eyeballing what's going on there. And even then, it's very mountainous, especially the farther south that you go. And so figuring out which mountain specifically is Mount Sinai is a little bit difficult. And we haven't even gotten to part of the confusing part of that, because like the Yam Surf, which is the Reed Sea or the Red Sea, the Bible doesn't even consistently call it Mount Sinai. In fact, it is exclusively called Mount Oreb in the book of Deuteronomy. Or for some reason, the Deuteronomists thought that Sinai was wrong. I do not know. So I think in the Exodus version, yeah, it's called Har Sinai, which basically means Mount Sinai. But I don't really think there's any difference between these two mountains. It's very common for some things to be named, to have multiple names, especially if you're talking about over time and culture. Things change, pronunciations change, some things get renamed. And we can even see that in our own culture. I think when I was talking about this as an introduction lesson a few weeks ago, I used the example of Mount McKinley. It was Mount McKinley. I'm pretty sure we named it after a president. I'm pretty sure it had like some Native American name before that. I have no clue what that possibly could have been. And up till about a few months ago, it even had a different name. And I don't even know what that was, but I now know it's back to Mount McKinley. So my point is just because something has a name now doesn't necessarily mean it's going to have that same name in the future. People point to this as proof of the documentary hypothesis. I don't know if you guys remember me talking about the documentary hypothesis. Supposedly, it is a theory that the first 5 books of the Bible were not written by Moses, but were instead written by 4 authors. And so you have what is the Yahwehist or the priest source. They call it Oreb, and you have the Elohim or the Deuteronomy source that calls it Mount Oreb. So those kind of people will be like, well, look, this is different proof. We're even looking at different time frames. So Yahwehists believe their writings are probably about 1,000 years old, according to the document hypothesis. Sorry, 3,000 years old. And the Deuteronomy source is about 2,600 years old. Supposedly, this is the book, Deuteronomy is the book that the priest found in the temple that had been lost in the time of Josiah. You guys remember that story? Yeah, it's kind of like one of those things that you don't really think about much when you read it, but might have cultural significance. It is given a few. It says it was completely in smoke when the people met God at Mount Sinai, because the Lord descended upon it in fire. Its smoke ascended into the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain quaked greatly. Which makes it sound like what? It makes it sound like a volcano. So people think that if this is where God met the people, that it was probably a volcano. Culturally, it is important to both Jews, Christians, and Islamists, probably all for the exact same reason. The only question is, where is it? And that's one of the questions we're going to talk about right now. So you can see on my map, you can see there's Egypt in the gray, in the yellowish color. I'm not sure what color you would call that. And you will see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different circles. I had to make these circles myself, so that's just why they look funny like that. And I'm just trying to make sure that they show up so you could see a general location, which is why some are better circles than others, so don't laugh at me. But these are basically the 10 general areas of people where people think Mount Sinai might possibly be. Well, you might be looking at this and you see, well, I see 5 of them that are in the Sinai Peninsula, and so I see 5 of them that are not in the Sinai Peninsula. And so I almost discount those 5 that are not. I think if it's anywhere, it's probably going to be one of these 2 towards the bottom of the Sinai Peninsula. But there is some evidence that people think may be in that side on the right. And so if I have any mention here, I don't know, I put this together a few months ago, so I can't remember what I actually put up there, but we'll look at those here in a second. So this is what we do know about how we could possibly get there. So this all starts on the road from the land of Goshen through the Reed Sea into the Sinai Peninsula, and then from where, that's a little bit iffy. So Scripture says this. We get some directions on where they traveled. It says they came to Elam, where they were the 12 wells of water and 70 palm trees. So they camped there by the waters. And we know from Elam, all the congregation of the children of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elam and Sinai. I assume that means Mount Sinai. I doubt it's talking about the Sinai Peninsula. And wilderness is one of those words that doesn't necessarily mean like, you send your children into the forest and it's just kind of wild and ungrown. It mostly just kind of means untamed. So sometimes when they're talking about wilderness, they're talking about like a desert. And sometimes when they're talking about a wilderness, they're talking about like undeveloped area. And which at that time, most of the things were underdeveloped, so that's not even really all that surprising. Yeah. Yeah. And then we learn from there, all the congregation of the children of Israel set out on their journey from the wilderness of Sin according to the commandment of the Lord and came in Rephidim. I'm not even sure I'm saying that correctly. Rephidim. So this is what Scripture tells us. They move from there. This is where, behold, I will stand before you there on the rock in Oreb, and you shall strike the rock, and the water will come out of it, and that the people may drink. So this is also very similar to the waters of Elam. So some people think that might have been in reference to that, and we're getting ahead of ourselves in the story. I think that's probably not true. It just logical conclusion makes the most amount of sense. And Moses did, and so we move a little bit forward from there. And so Moses did what was in the sight of the elders of Israel. So he came to the name of the place Massa and Meribah. And then this is where his father-in-law visits there. And then it says he departed from his own land. Why is this doesn't give us any direction, but this is important because where was Moses the first time when he found Mount Oreb?
He was with his father-in-law in
Midian? Marion? Yeah, Midian. Yeah.
his father-in-law there.
Yes. So we know if his father-in-law came to visit and he came to depart, we don't necessarily know that he lived with his father-in-law that 40 years he was together, but odds are he probably stayed relatively close. So the fact that he is paying this visit on their journey to Mount Sinai suggests that they are getting closer to their destination. And finally, in the 3rd month after the children of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on the same day, they came to the wilderness of Sinai, where they departed from Rephidim and come to the wilderness of Sin and camped in the wilderness. So Israel camped there before the mountain. All right, so 3 months. Now, I don't know what the average traveling speed is for a person. I do know if you were to force a normal person, you could force them anywhere from 20 to 50 miles a day on foot. That is a long time. So you're talking 4 miles per hour times 25, 4 divided by 20, let's say 5 miles an hour. That's 5 hours, 6 hours. So you could probably do 50 miles, anywhere from 12 to 14 hours a day, assuming you don't stop, and that's going to be really, really difficult. Yeah. And I'm just saying, that's one person. So yeah, well, yeah, there's multiple issues with that is, one, you're moving millions of people, so you automatically are going to cut that time in half. There's no way you're going to get 50. So let's say at best you get 25 miles a day. That doesn't mean you also have to stop. It means you have to set up your structures for when the night comes. You have to gather food. And then, of course, you can't go on the Sabbath, so we're stuck there for an extra day. And we don't even know how long that they stayed at these particular locations. So my whole point in illustrating this point is, even based on the time frame, it's impossible to ascertain how many miles that they actually traveled. Well, let's say they did 10 miles a day, 3 miles in 30 months. So they could have traveled, let's say 90 days, 90 times 10, is they could travel up to 900 miles in 3 months. Probably not. I'm going to guess, we'll say 750, being generous. And you could make it quite a bit of distance that way, but it doesn't help us ascertain any location. So, the only other thing to go on is, what are we looking for? Well, we're looking for evidence of, we're looking for evidence of a large mountain, or anything that would be considered a mountain. So that's the number one thing, and that's what those 10 locations represent. The number two thing that we're looking for is evidence of,
Well, somehow volcano, right?
well, that's the mountain part.
Oh,
Yeah.
massive.
Massive amounts of people, yes, because if anybody's ever just traveled with a family, you probably know your family leaves a lot of stuff behind. I mean, they didn't generate plastics like we do, and so that they're kind of not looking for. But you would be looking for, you've got massive amounts of people, estimated around 2 million, that, food, bodies, I mean, maybe articles of clothing, tent pegs, I don't know. Something to show that there were a large group of people here in that area. And the second one's, you're talking more than 3,000 years ago. So even if you could find, like I said, even if you can find with what you're looking for, the location of what you're looking for, then you have to dig. And buildings are a lot easier to find than evidence of people, because buildings tend to be large and people tend to be small. And of course, you're talking about people that didn't practice in a lot of metalworking. Bronze, this is the Bronze Age. They're not an army. So my guess is they probably weren't even allowed a lot of metal. We know that they were very adept at making bricks, which means that they were probably very adept at making clay. So the only thing that we could possibly be looking for, besides maybe human bones, is pottery shards. But let's talk about the mountains. So the first one we're going to talk about is located right there. It's called Jabal Makla. Makla? Any guess? I don't know. It is the tallest mountain in the northwest Arabian, thank you very much. I don't know why I can't say this. Peninsula. It is roughly 7,631 feet. Now, when Rachel and I were in Switzerland, when Rachel and I went on our trip to Europe, I told her that I want to go and see the Swiss Alps. I've always wanted to see the Swiss Alps. I love mountains, especially snow-capped mountains. And so not only did we go to the Swiss Alps, but we actually climbed. And we took a cable car up, and we took a train car down. It was kind of funny. But that mountain was almost 7,000 feet, which was pretty cool. And it did have some snow at the top, though it wasn't snow-peaked. It was the middle of summer after all. And that was probably a very difficult climb to climb on its own. Even just kind of being in that high altitude, I could feel that it was getting more difficult to breathe. And so for a normal person to climb this mountain probably would have been we can say, a lot of people think, okay, well, that's just a mile, maybe a mile and a quarter high. It doesn't really seem all that bad. Well, no, this would have been a difficult thing to just start from the bottom and go all the way up, especially if you've been walking for months. So that doesn't necessarily mean anything. It's just something I wanted to illustrate. One of the reasons that people think that it is one of the possible locations is because it has black igneous rocks, which are important for volcanic activity. So if this is acting like a volcano, like it seems to be doing, this would support that around it. And the other thing that makes it great is it has a large, flat area around it, which, if you've ever seen mountains, I mean, like you go to Mount Everest. Well, you don't have to go to Mount Everest, but here, look at Mount Everest is in the Himalayas. All right, but the thing is, it's kind of in the middle of the Himalayas. You can't just camp around the base of Mount Everest. Well, some people do, but I mean, it's still very jagged and rocky because you're in the mountain range. Unlike this mountain seems to be by itself, where it does have a large flat base around it where you can gather together a lot of people. So, one possible location. That's why it's up here, even though it's on the far side. Like I said, I don't like this because I don't like the distance it would have taken the people to get there. Because not only do you have to go through one Red Sea inlet, you have to go through another Red Sea inlet, which means, assuming you that is the Red Sea inlet you went through the first time, well, then you got to go up and around the other one. And I don't think that they could have made that journey in 3 months, not on foot, not with traveling with thousands of people. So yes, but also probably no. Jabal Musa, also here. This is one of the ones I do think that is a great location. It's commonly called today Mount Sinai. It is one of the traditional sites for Mount Sinai. And I think this one and another one are probably have the most support in it. It is roughly about the same height as the other one. About 200 feet smaller. And it also has volcanic rocks. One of the benefits of this one is the farther away you go in time, you're relying on archaeology to get you there to where you need to go. But if you have other things like cultural significance, this is where the hermeneutics part really comes into play, then maybe you could say, okay, well, there's a lot more support of this because we see that as early as the 1st century, and maybe even before that, people started journeying to this mountain as a significant place. There's churches and there's mosques around it, so you're talking like much later, probably about 1000 AD. And it even has this cave that is now today called Moses Cave. And so at least the mid-century, the middle-aged church thought this was the location. And there might be they might have their reasons for that. They might have also just decided, hey, this is the location, it's the one we're going with. Beautiful view. I love that view. I wish I could go there and see that view. This is what it would have looked like, especially if you're on top of the mountain, is probably what Moses saw when he was talking to God, if this was the location. And I feel like that's the kind of view you want when you're talking to God, just looking at his creation. Not a very good location for having a bunch of people around it, though. Mount Serbal, a little bit also farther, also not as tall, about the tall as that mountain Rachel and I climbed. It is the 5th highest mountain in the range, and if you're going based on the route alone, this is probably the one that best seems to fit the route. The only problem with this is that route that we all just described and all those places with names are like, hey, don't we know where those places are, right? We have a name for those places. Shouldn't we know where that is? Do we know where those places are? Absolutely not. So people look and they think, okay, well, I think this might be where this place is based on what is being described there and guessing what it might have looked like thousands of years ago. Things change very, very quickly, and we don't even have to necessarily do something to make them change. You ever notice how a river does this? I learned that, the reason why a lot of rivers do that? It's because of local wildlife. They make, especially beavers make dams, and they dam up one area, and then the one area where they didn't dam up floods, and it pushes the direction of the river. So that's really cool. I'm like, oh, look at that. That's God's creation, making waves.
And then, in different mountains or streams through mountains and stuff, depending on what comes off the mountain or the settlement of,
Mm-hmm.
it's
Yeah.
streams, and so it has to.
Yeah. I'm not a fan of the word climate change, because climate change is normally like, oh, well, this is, when most people talk about climate change, they're mostly talking about like global warming. But I mean, climate change has been going on for millions and millions of years. And there's always things to cause climate change, such as volcanoes. That's a big indicator of volcano, or hurricanes. We get hurricanes. In fact, I think we have a hurricane coming in. What? Floods? Yeah, that's another one. Mm-hmm. So land locations are always changing. What things look like are always changing. I remember, and you have to understand that while humans are pretty smart, we've only had satellites since, the Russians first sent one up in the 1950s, I think. That was when the first one was launched. Mm-hmm. And now there's like thousands of satellites up there, but I mean, we relatively, in our history, we haven't had them that long, and so mostly we've been going off as old maps. But it does fit. I mean, certainly it is in contention for the other one. It has a very old Christian monastery that's still there. So we knew that the early church made pilgrimages to this location, because that's the only reason to build a monastery there, is if you're going to have a pilgrimage there. It's not in the middle of anything else. It's kind of out of the way, so if it kind of fits that wilderness thing that we're talking about. So certainly it's a possible location. Also, in the general area, we have Mount Catherine, which is the highest mountain in Egypt. And what makes this thing interesting is it does fit the general location area. It does have volcanic rock, and it has cave paintings that would date back to the 4th and 5th century BC that we've discovered. So 4th century, 5th century BC, that's around the time of the Babylonian exile. Of course, Moses would predate that by 1,000 years. But we do know that it was at least a location. I don't know what those cave paintings are. I couldn't tell you. It wasn't in the thing I looked at to get the general descriptions of these mountains. But if you figure that out, let me know. I wonder if they're religious cave paintings. A lot of that stuff tends to be either like graffiti, or it tends to be culturally significant. All right, so everything else, these are the ones I just chose because they seem like the most accurate locations. So like I said, which one is it? I don't know. Maybe.
And I did look up Sinai Peninsula is about the size of West Virginia.
About the size of West Virginia? Really? I would have assumed it's a lot bigger than that.
I looked up the areas by state. That's the closest.
Okay, size of West Virginia. That's one of our smaller states.
But it's still big.
Yes, it's still a big area.
Want to find something.
Yeah, especially because West Virginia is also in Appalachia. It's in the mountains. I love West Virginia. I went to college in West Virginia. So yeah, maybe we'll never know because God doesn't want us to know. And I don't know why God would not want us to know other than the fact that he doesn't want us worshiping there. I do know that if that was his reasoning, it wouldn't surprise me because, like I said, people are already making pilgrimages to these locations. I don't care that anybody goes and sees something because it's a cool thing to see. But if you're going there as a place to worship God, then you completely miss the point of it. I know Christians and Jews every year, millions of Christians and Jews every year make pilgrimages to Jerusalem. And again, you're missing the point. We don't need to go to Jerusalem. We don't need to go to the temple. The temple doesn't even exist anymore. The temple was destroyed by the Romans. So maybe that's a possibility. Maybe it's just that it's been lost to antiquity, like so many other things. I mean, even if you look at something like Alexander the Great and his army, the writings we have on what Alexander the Great did came, I think, hundreds of years after his death. And even finding he had massive armies too, traveling through Europe. Not through Europe, but through Asia Minor. Not Asia Minor, well, Asia Minor, Asia, the Middle East, that all the way into India. Yeah, I mean, you had documentation by that point, a lot of writing and word of mouth, but still looking for archaeological evidence is quite difficult. So we're probably never going to find anything that would support large groups of people being buried there, especially because those large groups of people wouldn't have left any large structures behind. In fact, the only structure we know for sure that they actually built was what? A structure of any kind. No, they built the tabernacle, but that was a moving tent. Okay, I forgot about the tabernacle, but
I was going to say what they built was, I thought was destroyed because they had the golden calf.
yep, that's the one I was thinking of. The only structure that we know for sure that they built besides the tabernacle would have been the golden calf, and that was eventually destroyed, and we don't even know how big it was. I don't imagine it wasn't very big. I mean, they got all their gold, and they collected all from Egypt, and then they collected all that gold, and still to melt it down and to build it into another solid gold object. I mean, even if you got it all right. Does it matter that we know where Mount Sinai is? No. It would be cool, but I mean, I think humans have this desire to know things, and it drives us crazy when we don't know things. And so maybe in that way it will bother people, and I think, just one of those things that you got to let go.
Well, for us sometimes, because so many people doubt the writings of the Bible, so when you find archaeology that supports it, it kind of helps. Just prove it to people who are like, well, can't find that, so that must not be true.
Yeah, it could help from an apologetic standpoint, and that's really what a lot of apologetics this kind of apologetics is used to, is to help support claims of the Bible. But
it goes back to, if you're not going to believe it, you're not even going to believe it if you saw it. If you saw that, you still would think it's
and that's what I was going to say is my problem with it is the Bible is not making I don't like to look at the Bible in that way. If you want to look at the Bible is a source of truth, obviously. If you want to look at the Bible as a documentary, then I think you're completely missing the point of the Bible. And the Bible doesn't even present itself as a documentary. It presents itself as a way to better understand God and his love for his people. So, yeah, there's certainly, it does that in a lot of, it does that sometimes through historical narrative. It does that sometimes by recording, by writing poetry. It does that sometimes by telling prose. It does that sometimes by even doing the Apocrypha, that you get Daniel, Revelation kind of books in there. And so we get a lot of different writings to talk about that, and to look at it as this, in this one lens, it completely misses the point. All right, so let's talk about the law. Wouldn't it be great to have the Ten Commandments tablets that Moses had? So the law, when we talk about the law, we talk about the law in two different ways. The first way, and probably the easiest way to talk about the law, is to talk about this particular aspect of the law, and that is the Ten Commandments. It's often what we teach little kids. It's often what we have people memorize in Bible bowls and quizzes and whatnot. And it all kind of boils down to, if we can compress everything we know into, all right, well, there's a lot of different things you have to learn that are important, but if you just follow these 10 things, you'll be on the right track. And so in that way, this is the law. In fact, I think there's like somewhere around 600 different Mosaic laws that can just be boiled down into these 10. I mean, if you didn't kill anybody, you probably wouldn't be getting into trouble. Respect your family. Respect what's not yours. Don't take what's not yours. Respect your family, and love God. Put God first. Yes. In fact, we can probably boil this down to 10. And I think the same thing even almost goes to our laws today. Do you need to know every single law on the books in your culture? Hopefully not, because there are thousands of them. In fact, I remember when I was a kid, we always had reading time in our reading class, and there was to make sure you had a book, there was always books in the classroom. And so I remember picking up this book that was like totally real laws that nobody understands why they're there. And the one that I thought was hilarious was, the state of Oklahoma has a law against hunting whales in its waters. Why does that sound absolutely ridiculous? Because it's a landlocked state. So how could you possibly hunt a whale in the waters of Oklahoma? And so then I got to thinking, how did that even become on the books? Something must have happened where someone's like, we need this law. I don't know, maybe they had like a SeaWorld in Oklahoma a long time ago.
Or I was going to say, we do a really bad job of reviewing those and taking ones that are outdated off the books.
Mm-hmm.
So something happens, and then you're like, well, you can't do that, but that's a law. You're like, that's not even relevant anymore, but it's still a law. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you get to go back and say, okay, that doesn't matter anymore. That doesn't need to be there.
Yeah. This law also is separated from, we know that God gave these laws specifically to Moses. But we also know that despite that this should be enough, people being people are going to mess it up. And so therefore we get what is also called the law of Moses, every single thing that comes after it. So all 613 laws by Jewish tradition. 613. You ready to talk about all of them? No, I do not want to talk about all 613 laws. I talked about them. I've talked about many of them. We've talked about them in my Old Testament classes in college. We talked about them in church. We've even laughed at a number of them. And some of them, like today, don't even make much sense. Such as, you cannot mix fibers in clothing. Why not? What's the whole point of that? Or the one that always gets me is don't boil a calf in its mother's milk. Why does that matter at all? You can eat the mother, you can eat the calf. Why can't I eat them at the same time? And actually, if you go to Israel today, for that very same reason, you cannot find a cheeseburger anywhere in the country. Yep. And I didn't believe it, so when I had some free time when I went to Israel,
You have a hamburger, but not a cheeseburger.
yes. So I didn't.
I remember seeing a hamburger on the menu, but I can't,
Mhm.
I never paid attention whether it had cheese or not.
Somebody told me that, and I didn't believe it. So when I had free time when I was in Jerusalem, I went into a McDonald's there, and I asked if I could get a cheeseburger, and they said they do not sell cheeseburgers. In fact, they told me nobody sells cheeseburgers. So you can buy cheese, you can buy burgers. If you want to not be kosher, you can put them together, but you cannot buy them together. Yeah. Now,
I would have them to some restaurants in Tel Aviv that we always go to.
this is also when I was there in 2011, and I'm pretty sure it's still a rule because Netanyahu is the leader there, and he's very conservative from what I understand. So I highly doubt that's one of the rules that changed. 313 laws by total. So the law of Moses refers to the 10 commandments, the statutes, the instructions God gave to the Israelites through Moses after the Exodus, found mainly in the books of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So when we define the law of Moses, that is normally what we are talking about. And what's the point of the law? Don't look up there. Look at me.
But to me, it was pointing out their sin,
The law certainly does a very good job of that.
right? It was mostly telling them what God did not like, and what he thought was wrong. And so, if you do any of these things, you have gone against God's will.
Sure.
Or something like that. But to me, it was just to point out sin.
And that's probably a very reductive way to look at it. I mean, none of what you said is wrong. It's just like, well, that's a very negative thing. So we're gonna put a positive. Yeah, so we're going to put a positive side, and the law is supposed to serve as foundation for the covenant to say these are God's people, and God's people have been set apart. And in this way, this is how they've been set apart. Because the law of Moses doesn't really apply to those people who have not been set apart. So if God, another word to say set apart is to be holy, or sanctified or pure. So in this way, the law gives them an indication on how they could be better, they could better follow God's covenant. They had another way of doing that, and that was given to them probably about 1,000 years before, well, no, let's say 500 years before this, and that was another way that they were set apart. Before the law, normally happened when they were about 8 days old. Circumcision, there you go.
I guess I could see that one better, because when you think of the Jews, and when they went against what was written in the law of Moses, they were cut off.
Yeah. So the law is, like you said, provides clear instruction of what is right and what is wrong. But that's not necessarily its purpose. It does do that, and it does that very, very well. If anything, that is the thing it does the best. But that's its purpose, which is why when you talk about what God talks about for giving them in the law in the first place, and the fact that he doesn't really want to get into the sacrificial system, but he gives them the sacrificial system, is about making them closer to him, reestablishing that covenant. Unlike our laws today, the law of Moses guides all aspects of a Jew's life. So we as societies, people, have to follow the law to function as a society. But mostly, you could do whatever you want in your home. I mean, especially in America. If I want to get drunk and do whatever, and have sex with 500 women and write terrible things online, I mean, I can pretty much can. And even though none of those things are against the law, it does not necessarily say anything about me as, it says a whole lot about me as a person. It probably says that I am a bad person. Even the most immoral people would probably agree with that.
So let's talk about this again, because when Jesus established the new covenant, right?
Mm-hmm.
So was it established because they just missed the whole intent of the law of Moses? The reason he needed, to give them the new commandment, love the God and love man as, others as yourself? Because I thought it was to I don't know, to reestablish, the law now is in your heart, as opposed to it's written down and you were supposed to follow these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 rules.
Are you answering this question, or okay, I'll let Ed say what he's going to say.
The new covenant was established to forgive sin. So the old covenant did not forgive
Mm-hmm.
sin. It tells us plainly in the New Testament the blood of bulls and goats could not forgive sin.
Yeah.
Okay.
We established it because we were
So,
through Christ's blood, we are forgiven.
Okay, I got that, right? But is it that they missed the intent to have all of these rules written down? The reason he can give you all of these rules too? Or was it, you see what I mean? I was thinking it was to establish something different than just worrying about, I gotta follow these rules. Because if I follow these rules, then I'm good.
yeah, I don't see how his question doesn't answer your question. Maybe that's why I'm confused, or sorry, his answer doesn't answer your question.
Venus asked the question earlier today, what covenant are we under?
Yeah.
Whose blood are we under? Should answer that question.
So let me try this. When we look at, God establishes a few different covenants in the Bible, okay? And a covenant is just another way to say promise. Yeah, an agreement. So the first one we see is like the rainbow, and then we see the covenant of circumcision, and we see the covenant, the promise to Abraham to multiply his nations. We see another promise of, you will strike his head, he will strike your heel. That's there's probably a lot more stuff like that. But the big stuff when we're talking about the law of Moses, all these covenants are meant to draw people closer to God. All right, and that's the intent of the law of Moses, is to bring the people to follow God's ways. But Ed pointed out the very obvious flaw in the law of Moses is that on its surface, it offers no redemption. Which is why when we look at Hebrews 11 is a perfect example of the law failing but people still finding salvation without Christ. Now, I'm going to use that term very, very carefully because we're specifically talking about individuals that are the exception to the rule. We know as Christians, the only way we could go to Jesus is through his blood, right? All right, but when you get to Hebrews 11, you see that that wouldn't possibly apply unless you want to get into some of the very technical stuff about Christ being there in the beginning, and yeah. So we're going to let's just assume that on its surface, that you could get that way. The law, by guiding you towards holiness, is to help put your heart in the right place. Now, which is why when we read about that, often when he talks about giving a new covenant, he uses the term uncircumcised heart. So these people, like the Pharisees, are following the letter of the law, but they're not following the intent of the law. In the same way, we see that people followed people like Abraham, like David. David's a great example of this, is that they didn't necessarily follow the letter of the law, but they did follow the intent of the law, and that was to go after God, which is why, very, very simply put, you can talk about some of that thing where Christ covers them back then. Does that make more sense? Okay. Maybe someone better than me to explain it. Now, yeah. So I want to, one of the things that we're going to look at, hey, you're late. I'm all done. Yes, it's 5:30. All right. So one of the things that I want to look at is when you look at the different themes that is in here, one of the biggest overarching themes is the theme of holiness. You don't find that in any normal law. You don't even find this in any morality code. Morality code is just trying to do good based on whatever good definition is of the morality that you're following. But holiness means that you're trying to be that set apart. So when we look at this phrase in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 2, be holy, for I am holy. This is the Jews following the intent of the law as seen by the covenant that God makes with Israel and Moses on the mountain. All right, I'm all done. Ed, do you have anything else to add? Were you raising your hand to say something?
Yeah, you covered part of it. So if we're saying that the law could get you to heaven,
Well, I don't think we are saying that.
No, I'm not saying that at all.
then we didn't need Christ. Because see, Christ lived a perfect
Yeah.
life. Could somebody else have lived that perfect life?
I don't think so. Not according to Paul, not according to the words of Paul. And I'm pretty sure Paul wrote those words in the Spirit. Yeah.
I guess my thing was people were missing. I think when Jesus speaking to the Pharisees, they were so intent on following the letter of the law that they were missing the intent.
Exactly. And that's what the intent of the law is, to draw people closer to God. And you can follow that. You can follow that to the letter. And we know that there are people who have tried to follow it to the letter. Paul writes, when he talks about his shortcomings, he talks about like he was a Jew of the Jews, circumcised on the 8th day from the tribe of Benjamin. And he says, of the religious sect Pharisee, and he says, according to the law, blameless. Does that mean that he never sinned under the law? Well, then that would be blasphemy because everybody has sinned according to the law. But that's not what Paul means when he says he is blameless. He is saying he is like, because he's a Pharisee. He answers it earlier by saying, I'm a Pharisee. It means that I take every part of the law seriously. I observe every part of it that I possibly can. And that's what he means by that. Well, it's the only thing that makes sense unless he's saying he never sinned, and I don't think Paul would make, and I know Paul would not make that claim. And so you can follow the law to the letter, but if you miss its intent, then it's not going to help you. It's the same thing with Christ. You could do all the good works for Jesus. You can go and you could teach Bible and you can baptize people, but if it's not in here, I don't think it means anything at all. I mean, you can get wet. Anyway, that's all I got today. We'll go more into this in the later part of this month.